How do you make decisions, whether big or small, whether it's what you're going to have for lunch or what you're going to pursue as a career? What influences the decisions you wind up making? Do you just decide in the moment, well, this is what I want right now? Or are your decisions calculated? Here's the truth about decisions. In life, you will either make decisions based on your value system or your comfort zone. The past few weeks, we've spoken about renewing our minds and developing an attitude or a spirit of excellence. Now, as we do that, it's important that we take a closer look at how we are making the decisions in our lives. So today we're going to talk about defining our values. Because again, in life, you will either make decisions based on your value system or your comfort zone. But guess what? The comfort zone is the default. Unless you know what your values are, you keep them in front of you, and you remind yourself often, you will always default to your comfort zone. There's another way to compare our values and our comfort zone. It's really the difference between our spirit and our flesh. Our spirit is long-term. Our flesh is short-term. Our spirit is profit. Our flesh is loss. The word says the flesh profits nothing. And your comfort zone is 100% flesh-led, where your value system should be 100% spirit-led.
Yeah.
So unless you want to live your life guided by your flesh, which, here's a hint, you don't. It might be pleasurable in the moment. It's always better to eat Dunkin'.
Which I have a box right next to me on the floor that I had delivered right before we started recording.
Yep. You know, it feels good to eat a dozen donuts now, but it's not going to feel good 10 years from now. It doesn't feel good to go to the gym, at least in the moment. It doesn't feel good to wake up early when it's still cold and, go into time with the Lord right now. But in the future, those compounded decisions make all the difference in your life. So unless you want to live your life guided by your flesh, you need to live your life guided by your value system. And here's 3 steps on how to do that. Number 1, define your values. If you don't know what they are, how can you possibly know if you're living by them?
So let's get into how to discover those values. Sometimes the thought of figuring out what your values are could be really overwhelming because it feels and it sounds like this really big process. We created these steps to really simplify it for you. So here they are. Number 1, if you have a pen and paper, I would take it out. Number 1, reflect on meaningful moments. And this is what that means. Think about times that you felt proud, fulfilled, or joyful. So really reflect on those times. And as you reflect on those times, you want to ask yourself, what were you doing when those feelings started to come up? Who were you with? And what made it so meaningful for you? Number 2, you want to identify key life areas. And when I say key life areas, I'm talking about domains. For example, family, faith, career, health, personal growth, etc., etc. And you want to pick 3 to 5 domains that matter the most to you, and you want to explain why. And side note, you don't want to skip any of these parts of the process. You want to go through the whole process from start to finish. Number 3, you're going to narrow down your values to about 3 to 7 values.
Just a few practical steps on what helped me go through this process. I remember sitting down before we met and going through this process of defining what my values were and really what our family values were going to be. Number 1 practical tip, defining your values can be extremely difficult to do with distractions. So shut off your phone, get a pen and paper, and just sit in a chair and begin envisioning the answers to the questions that Alexis shared. For myself, I sat down with a pen and paper for about 30 minutes and just thought, what do I want to be known for? And I jotted down about 7 things right off the bat, and that list grew to about 13. And like you said, I then condensed it down to the least common denominators on that list of things that I could say, this is what I want to be known for. So that's step 1. You have to define your values. Step 2, keep them in front of you. Your values are no good to you if you forget what they are. Now, when we met, like I said, I had my values defined already. And these were not just my values, but as the leader of my home, these were going to be the values that I led my wife with and the values that we would lead our children with. So they were really our family values. And one of the coolest gifts that Alexis ever got me was for our first Christmas or
I don't know.
birthday?
Probably.
I didn't know.
It was your birthday.
Yeah. I didn't know that she had done this, but she had seen my values that were handwritten on a piece of notebook paper
Crusty dusty.
and tacked to my corkboard. And she had this made, which was the first iteration of the McGibbon family values. There's 7 values on this list. And I hung this up when we got married and we got our first home. This was hung right in our entryway so that we had to see it every single day and be reminded of what we stand for. Because again, on a day-to-day basis, when you're not in a weak moment, it's going to be relatively easy to live by your values, but it's when you're feeling weak, when your flesh has a strong desire, when you need to have this in your back pocket, ingrained in your subconscious to be able to live up to it. Those are the moments where an alarm should go off when you're tempted to live contrary to your values of, oh, wait, hold on a second. McGibbons don't do that.
I was actually going to bring that up. How many times have we faced obstacles where we would have to go back to our values and we treated it as a filter where it was like, okay, right now we're in the heat of the moment. This is an obstacle. We know it's an obstacle. What do our values say? Because at the end of the day, emotions happen, right? And our thoughts and our minds might change depending on how we're feeling that day. But the thing that's going to stay consistent besides the word of God is going to be the values that we fashioned and the values that we set for our family. Those don't change. They stay the same. And if you have on your values that you don't lie, you go back to your values and you remember, oh, that's right, we don't lie. Or for example, like we have live in the perfect will of God and never settle for plan B. So if there's ever an obstacle where we're tempted to settle for plan B, we go and we look at our values and we remember that that's what we live by.
And it's also a great way as a married couple to diffuse arguments, because so many conflicts that we could potentially have were actually solved by going back to our values. This was a commitment from us both to live up to these values. So if one of us is, having a weak moment where we either made a decision or we're thinking about making a decision, instead of the other person saying, well, I don't want you to do that, or I don't think you should do that, we just remind each other of the commitment that we made of, hey, we have a higher standard than this. So it's not what I want, it's what we both committed to.
Right. When we got married, these values were already set in place because like Derek shared, when he was a single man, he sat down and he wrote down the family values that he wanted to have for his future family. So really, I married into these values. I had no say in them. I wasn't the one to sit down with a pen and paper and come up with these values. But I will say that when we got married, I looked at these values because I am a smart woman and I'm not just going to take values for what they are. And I wanted to assess them for myself. And the reason that these values still stand is because they are founded and based in the word of God. So if I look at one of these values and I had a bone to pick with one of them, really I had a bone to pick with the word of God. So as you do your values, align them with the word of God. Don't make these values based off of emotion. Don't base them off of maybe situations that you've gone through in the past, maybe past traumas, and you're trying to avoid maybe future traumas, but really align them with the word of God. You have a creative spirit in you, so word them in a way that makes sense to you, word them in a creative way, but at the end of the day, make sure that those values are founded in the word of God.
Number 1, define your values. Number 2, keep them in front of you. And number 3, redefine and refine them when necessary. One of the biggest areas I see people trip themselves up in is they make a commitment to their values and they treat it as Bible. They treat it as gospel, and they say, well, no, this is my value. This is what I made the decision to be known for, so I can't divert from that. I have a question for you. Think about someone 10 to 15 years younger than you. Do you trust that person? Do you see them as wise? Do you see them as someone who makes good decisions? Now, maybe there are some, but hopefully you being 10 to 15 years older with added perspective and added years of wisdom can see that they're also still young and they still have a lot of learning to do. One of the biggest mistakes that I've seen people make is living their lives based off of the best thinking of a younger, dumber version of themselves. And I'll speak for myself included. This list of values that I just showed you, I sat down and made that initial list when I was 25, 26, 27 years old. It's been many years since then. I'm now married. I have 2 kids. We've grown businesses. We have a lot more experience now, and I'm a lot wiser than I was back then. I have a lot more information and content and a better relationship with the Lord. How foolish would it be if I was living my life now based off of the best thinking of a 25-year-old? So I am actually in the process of doing this now, where I'm reviewing, where I'm redefining, refining our values and coming up with a better, more improved list, not one that's totally different. We're going to take the best parts of our initial values and implement them now. But I'm willing to analyze them. I'm willing to look at them again, because I don't want to live my life based off of a lesser wisdom. How many times do we see a person who's in their late 20s, early 30s, and they're pursuing a career that they don't even love? And you ask them, well, why are you doing this? And they say, well, I made the decision when I was 18 that I wanted to be an engineer. So this is why I'm doing it.
Yeah.
They're living their lives based off of the best thinking of a teenager, which is crazy, because teenagers, well, I'll leave it there.
They don't even have fully developed brains yet.
Yeah. Redefine and refine your values when necessary. Take these 3 steps, know your values, and live by them. God bless.
Happy fasting.